This is Everyday Discipleship, a podcast whose mission is to equip Christians to live lives with a biblical worldview. My name is Josh Rice, and with me is Cole Chenal. We are both pastors at Reformation Baptist Church in Centerton, Arkansas. Today we're going to be continuing on in our series on how Christians can save the world. This is part 4, and we still don't know how many, but we've been going through the book that Doug Wilson wrote called Gashmu Saith It, which is really about how to build Christian culture, and that's what the series is about. And so for this one that I'm really excited about, I'm gonna send it over to you, Cole, and kind of set it up for us.
Yeah, so what we've been doing is obviously going through Gashmu Saith It. You should buy it. You should read it. It is worthwhile. It is very good, very brief. These are more discussions about, hey, some of the ideas and principles that Wilson lays out. What do those actually practically work themselves out? I think we're working stuff out in our own lives, trying to figure out as elders of our church, how do we work these things out in our church to help Christians to live with a biblical worldview and, yes, save the world eventually, that bring the gospel to the nations, and for us starting right here in North Arkansas. And so we talked about rules like rules 1 and 2 are developing a counterculture, like a distinct Christian counterculture, and the second one is don't flinch when the world pushes back, that we should be pushing against the world with the gospel, and the world is going to push right back against us. We talked about committing to a church. We talked about, that was rule number 3. Then rule 4 and 5 is really loving one another according to the law and developing a really strong bond within our Christian community, that we really should have bonds that are as deep as family bonds, that we are the family of God. And so this one we're calling Sharpen the Arrows. The biblical imagery obviously coming from the psalm that talks about children being arrows in the quiver of the righteous man. And this is about children discipleship, discipling our kids. And we're going to get into Christian education and what that looks like. But the big idea being that at the end of the day, if you're going to build a culture that changes the world, that saves the world, that can't just look like us right here, right now. We got to be sending arrows downwind into the culture beyond us, right? I'm going to live another, Lord willing, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. I need a legacy after me. And that's what every Christian needs to be thinking. How do we send a legacy beyond us of children that are carrying on the same mission, same gospel, same theology that we have, to continue pushing against the world and bringing the gospel to bear on every aspect of life?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit something there that we had talked about before, is that, you know, these are things that Christians do. This has been a big miss, I think, in America, is that there's not been a lot of forward thinking. There's been a lot of, you know, thinking about our own life, how we're going to make it as a Christian right now, and not a lot of thought about our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. And that goes from a church perspective too. Like, what is our church's legacy going to be in 150 years? A lot of times we've been trying to just survive the next 10 years. And when you do that, it actually is kind of counterintuitive. Like, trying to survive the next 10 years is going to make sure that you're not effective over the long run. Yeah. And, you know, the Christian church is on offense, and I think we've missed that too. That's you know, when we talk about sharpening the arrows, the idea is consistent with Scripture that the man of God is a warrior for God, right? That we are making war on the enemy, that we're taking ground. It's not we're trying to hold the fort, we're trying to take ground.
Yeah, we're taking Satan's fort. I mean, that's what Jesus talks about when he says the gates of hell will not prevail against it. The gates are the defensive thing. Hell is on the defense because Christ has already overcome sin, Satan, and death on the cross and resurrection. So we are on the offense going out into the world, and our children are one of the greatest weapons we have, that we can weaponize them and send them beyond us into the culture and also multiply our impact, right?
So as we sit in the culture right now, those weapons have been turned against us. Because let's just call it what's happened, right? For at least the last century of America, we've progressively and gradually, to a greater extent, lost our children.
Yes.
Right? So what has happened is the arrows in the hand of the godly warrior have been lost.
What is the percentage? Like, it's like, isn't it something stupid? Like 80% of kids abandon the church and abandon the faith after they get out of the house.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the last Barna was saying. It is upwards of 80%, somewhere between 75 and 80 leave by the time they're 20. That grew up in the church.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and I know we talked about that. I think it was an episode on teaching kids to love the church that we talked about some of those misses. Like, we've not taught our kids to love the church.
Yeah.
And I think a big reason for that was in, you know, episode 2 of this, or maybe 3, where we were talking about the church being connected to the church, is that a lot of times there hadn't really been a church to be connected to. There's been like a thing we go to on Sundays without those molecular bonds, right? Without those real dividing lines. And so, you know, it's kind of like asking them to love some kind of spirituality that's really undefined. And I think that's why we lose them, because what we're going to talk about today really gets into it. And if you don't know, I've been an educator in public school for 17 years. So I've been doing this a long time, behind enemy lines, so to speak. But what I've seen is that kids, like everyone else, are drawn to people who tell them the truth. And I think that's going to be one of the hallmarks of what we got to talk about, because, as we start this, we're going to talk about discipleship in the home, right? Like where it all starts, because we know, all parents know, those formative years are really from infant to like 3 or 4 years old. A huge amount of that child's worldview, personality, like the way they're quote unquote hardwired, starts in those first few years of life, right? And so that discipleship time where the parent is the primary caregiver, right, where that parent is giving them all their worldview, those are the time, like Christians, we have got to be super intense during those times. And I think that's where we go now, because we've been practical with these, right? The obvious question that comes up is, how do I do that? Right? So I know that I'm sharpening this arrow, and when that arrow tip is the most malleable and when it's the most able to be sharpened is those early years, infant to 3 or 4 years old. How do we sharpen and make the most gains during that time? That's really the question, I think, for the start of this episode.
Man, I wasn't going to go here. I even hesitate. I don't know why I hesitate. I mean, listen, I know I talk a big game, but there's still things I consider and I think, because I don't want to be taken out of context. I don't want to unnecessarily hurt somebody that isn't in this position because of better providence or whatever. But like, one of those ideas is we have to organize our homes biblically, first and foremost.
Yeah.
And Paul tells us in Titus that women, the younger women, are to be taught by older women to love their husbands and love their children, and to be working at home, to be prioritizing the home, to basically be at home. I think one of the difficulty things is, let me say it because someone's going to throw it out there, right? I'm not the legalist right here saying if you're working at all, you're in sin. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, just practically, full-time jobs, I don't know how much you're able to prioritize your home if both parents are working full-time jobs. Now, some of that might be better providence. So you have a ton of student loan debt, so you have other debt that you shouldn't have gotten involved in. When you talk about we're talking about a principle here, how that applies individually. That's going to be a little bit different and might look a little bit different for everybody involved. But the idea being is that one of the greatest blessings, and I think one of the things Christians should strive for in a countercultural world, and admittedly, especially with inflation, especially with the way the economy is, this is very, very difficult because, make no mistake, Satan hates it. Why do you think this is the way it is? Why do you think the world system that hates God is driving it to where it's difficult for women to stay home and the husband to work and make a living? Because not every guy can make a living that can support his whole family and provide them a home that is not in the ghetto. Right. And so that's why I'm not being a legalist about it. But the idea is that we have to do everything we can, and as much as we are able, to make our priority the home by men striving and seeking to make enough money, even if it looks like cutting back, right? Maybe it looks like having a worse car or not upgrading that house. You might have to make some sacrifices. But the goal being, how do we get my wife intentionally home with my kids as much as we possibly can? That's what I'm willing to say. Right, prioritizing the home. Yeah,
and I think there's a couple of realities that, and I use the word reality because I want to hit a couple of things. We live in a feminist culture, and we've talked about that, and so that's why this stuff gets so controversial, right? Because it's poking culture in the eye, and I say this with a lot of tenderness to mothers. Motherhood is a gift to women. Motherhood is a miracle. It's the beauty of creation in everyday life. Words fail me watching my mom do it, watching my wife do that. It's an amazing thing. And so I want to peel back one of the subtle lies I think that the enemy has made inroads with Christian women. And one of those is, I've heard it said, I've heard Christian women say, it would be great to, I think, stay at home with the kids, but I think I would go crazy. I think I just have to get out. And I'm going to tell you, like, that is a subtle lie of the enemy, because I know you're not saying that in reality. What you are saying, though, the theology behind that is, I'm not going to have the grace or the equipment to do what God has designed me to do.
Yeah.
And so I do, like, I push back on that gently but hard and tell you it is a deception. And if that is the time, like, we know this is true, right? That these kids at an early age, mothers have just a tremendous discipleship impact on those little children, and dads have a different role in that situation, because the dad is not nurturing, the dad is disciplining, the dad is providing that safety of the big deep voice that is there, that is present, that's involved, that loves his wife. They see all this stuff. The 2-year-old kid sees this stuff, and they perceive and they understand what's going on. And I'm extremely passionate about this. And here's what we have to look at. I always say, like, you can look downstream at what's happened. And when we took mothers out of the home, we lost our children. It's a society upheaval that happens, and the reason why is because we bought into the lie that it's okay to get bossed around by a man at work,
I think,
but not to be under headship in the home.
And I think that's what makes this part difficult to even talk about, is because there's really two types of women in the church. Even, like, one is the feminist, the closet feminist that wants to work and wants to have the career.
Well, they bought the lie, and they're rankled by the conviction that comes with the truth.
And they do need the hard push.
Yes.
They do need the hard push that, your children is your glory. Like, you are making a generational, worldwide impact by being a mother to your children.
Yeah, you're saved through childbirth.
But then you also have the women that desperately would love to be home, but they look at their finances, they look at their life, and they just don't see a way to do it. And I think, like, what I would pastorally, like, when I've engaged in conversation like this, because what I don't want to be doing either as a pastor is heaping on guilt on a woman that wants to be home, doesn't see a way to do it, and now she feels like she's disobeying God if she's not staying at home. Because, like I said, I'm making this a sin issue. I think the sin issue is, if you're not prioritizing your home, there's a sin issue.
Yeah.
And if you're working, like, I can say this definitively, if you're working 80 hours a week as a mom, where you're not raising your kids.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you can't be working at all. But I think that God's norm and God's pattern, if it's available to you, there's much blessing in having the wife stay home. But what I would be telling a woman, it's like, she would say, I was talking to a family, and they're like, I want to, but I make, the husband makes $40,000 a year, say, I can't afford XYZ. What I would tell them is, okay, listen, here's what you need to do. Consecrate your life to the Lord. Commit to ask the Lord to say, what do you want us to do? What do you want our family to look like? Cut back wherever you can. Right? Get a plan to pay off all your debt, because debt will kill you in terms of being able to have this as an option. Get rid of your debt. Make a plan. Cut back wherever you can. And you ask the Lord, provide for whatever you want us to do. And He's going to do exactly that.
My parents did just that. They had 4, and when I was a child, we did not have a lot of stuff. We really didn't. By today's standards, I think we would be laughably poor. Like, I don't think we were poor by the standards of when I was a child. I mean, we had plenty of food and that kind of stuff. But I cannot. It's hard to even explain the grace and the blessing that I was handed by my mom and my dad sacrificing so that my mom could stay home and raise me. It has resulted in a lifelong relationship with my mom, where she is. I know now as a parent what she did. It is a thing that I see, just the beauty that's almost, it's mind-blowing, and it bowls you over, the sacrifice that she said, me getting adult time and being out is not as important as taking care of these kids, and me having vacations and nice vehicles is not as important. And my dad and mom both did that, and I'm a product of that. I mean, I do, and it wasn't an easy thing they did. And the other thing, and I think it's the hinge piece, is that not only it's not enough. Your presence is important, but then you have to be intentional about what you're doing with children. And I think that falls into these two camps in that home life. Is there's discipleship and there's discipline.
Yeah.
Right. And both those things are things that are proactive from the parents.
Yeah. So just to transition out, just so people understand exactly what we're saying. Like, when we talk about women, like what Titus talks about, women should love their wives and husbands and work at home. That's what Paul says in Titus 2. That's how they adorn the gospel of God. That's how they show the transformation of the gospel and make an impact for the kingdom. Is what we're saying is, as a family, every Christian family should look at their life and say, what can we do to make it where she is at home as much as humanly possible to raise our children?
Yep.
That's what we're asking for.
Yeah. And
that looks like making sacrifices elsewhere. That looks like not going on vacation sometimes, but it's looking like playing the long game, saying you only get your kids. I mean, that's what I was amazed by. Like, there's a daycare that's across my house in my neighborhood, and there's people dropping their kids off. I don't know all their situations, obviously, and there's people dropping their kids off from like 5:30 in the morning until like 8 at night, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every time I see it, it's one of the saddest things in the world to me because I'm saying, man, they're missing it.
Yeah,
they're missing this great gift of raising their children that God's given them,
mm-hmm.
and some of them might not be able to, right? Like the
Right.
single mom or
Right.
whatever, like that. Like that's not a judgment of sin. That's just saying it's sad because it's obviously broken. That's
Yeah.
not what God has designed. That's not what God wants. That's an effect of sin. That's not an effect of God's kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Is the idea. And so we want people prioritizing the home, and men that looks like trying to do whatever you can to provide for your family as much as God. Right? God's the one that gives us everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if we come to the Lord and we say, God, will you please help us? These are our convictions biblically. Will you please make a way? Because if you don't make a way, we don't have a way.
Mm-hmm.
And see what He will do, and then let it be in His hands, right? Because we're consecrating our life to the Lord. If we're not out there being like, well, we kind of like the double income thing, we kind of like the multiple vacation thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a totally different heart
Mm-hmm.
than somebody that is having to work right now because of student debt or whatever, trying to get into a situation where they can be different.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's totally different, and that's where it is tough because there's lots of situations.
Yeah.
But the one situation that's normative is that we found that both parents working outside the home full time is not working.
No.
It's not. It cannot be the normative way that Christians order their lives.
Yes.
And we have to stop. And so part of this generational growth is that we disciple our children not to do that.
Yes.
Right? We disciple our children to not be in that situation where they feel this tremendous pressure and maybe even have the need to have mom working outside the house, because you can prevent it if you're working to prevent it from a young age.
Well, so I'll just tell this
Right.
too to single people, single men, single women. Man, think about it.
Clean it up.
Think
too.
about it before
Yeah.
you, like, when you're single, especially if you have student debt right now and you're single and all your income is your own, use it to pay that stuff off
Yeah.
because you're investing in your family down the road.
Yeah.
You know, I was very blessed that I didn't have any student debt, but thanks to my parents, my wife had very little, and it was only by the grace of God that we're able to make it where she's able to stay home.
Mm-hmm.
But God provides. We are making sacrifices, but God provides, and I think that's what I would encourage people to do. Jesus tells us that God will provide for us.
Yeah.
He knows what we need. We don't have to be like the Gentiles worrying about our life.
Mm-hmm.
Go to the Lord and say, God, what do you want for our family? And He's going to provide whatever He needs.
Yeah, and I think
for your
that
family.
I think that kind of talk is the proactive decision making and faithfulness that's going to lead to doing a good job of them with our children when we have them. Because just as we're teaching kids from a young age to order their life based on family and what they're going to do with their children someday, we as parents have to begin with the end and plan, like, what do I want my 4-year-old to know, and what kind of person are they going to be?
Well, it's like it's what Paul commands us to do in Ephesians, that we are to raise our children in the fear and admonition of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Fear of God, worship of Him, reverence of Him, admonition, His teaching, His correction, His way of life.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we are to raise our kids, according to the Word of God. And that takes intentional, everyday, all-out effort
Mm-hmm.
all the time.
Yeah, and sometimes it looks like the bar's not moving at all.
Yeah.
It really does. I mean, that's the encouragement, because, you know, I've told you this several times. I think dealing with humans is messy,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're not super predictable in a lot of ways. Like, our emotions are out there, and for a kid that doesn't know how to restrain them yet, like, it's tough.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tough deal because they're learning how to put guardrails on. They're learning how to control themselves. They're learning self-government, and we're teaching them that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that mom and dad, I would say that to use this time wisely, to raise up our children in the fear and admonition of the Lord. I think the first things first are that obviously mom and dad are both committed to Christ, connected to the church, and loving community. And then what flows from that is a lot of times people don't think this with child rearing, but your love for one another and your togetherness, being on a team, is critical to proper discipleship of children. If mom and dad are on different teams, then it's going to be a disaster. So we have to think through how are we going to discipline, how are we going to disciple, what are the rules of the house, and how are we going to structure this thing, what are the things that we need to impart and teach.
And that's like where I would say men, in conjunction with their wives as their helper,
Mm-hmm.
men set the direction of their home.
Yes.
You need to sit down and say, what do I want my family to look like? Which is basically like a Christian family. What does a Christian family look like?
Mm-hmm.
And what do I need to do to make that happen?
Mm-hmm.
And how do I bring my wife along to carry out that plan while I'm out providing for my family and doing what God's called me to do?
Yeah, and that's simpler than it sounds, right? Because what we want them to do is we want to teach our kids to hate sin, to love God, to love others, and to love to worship. I mean, that's really it. Like if we can disciple in those things, to hate sin, and that means that we call things what they are, right? Lying is a sin. When you lie, you're breaking God's law.
Oh, lying's a big sin in my house. It's a big discipline.
Well, that's I'll tell you that's our number one house rule is that we're honest.
Yeah.
That's it. That's
you can't have
really
a culture
the
of
one.
lies.
Yeah.
Right? God hates lies. Like we see what lies do to our culture right now. So if you have a culture that doesn't punish lies in your home, now we get all these liars out here that have been lying their whole life and they've never been corrected in it.
That's right.
And the idea being that, like, it's like we're talking about discipline, right? Disciplining our kids, and we talked about spanking them before, like that God commands us to spank them.
Yep.
I always, right, we don't want to get into the whole thing of it. I always ask Owen, why am I spanking you? And a lot of times he'll say, I don't know, because that's what kids do.
Yeah.
But I explain the sin. I explain the reason why, and it's not like, oh, you jumped on the couch. It's you disobeyed your mom. Mm-hmm. That you name the sin and you show them how they committed that sin.
That's right.
But that's what you're doing. You're naming the sin. I'm saying this is why we need Jesus. This is why we need forgiveness, buddy. Like, this is sin, and I'm going to discipline you because I love you. And afterward, we're going to pray and we're going to ask Jesus to forgive us, and then we're going to be all good. Right? That's really
and that's crucial. And that's why I think in the natural order of things with transgressions, when kids transgress, I think that's why spanking is really the preferred discipline, because spanking doesn't hold a grudge. And I think kids understand it. It's very simple. And I think I'll throw this 2 cents in there. I think there's been a lot of not age appropriate advice that goes around for a lot of kids, because remember, we're talking about early childhood here. Like, when they first have will and they understand what you're doing, that's when we're talking about discipline, right? Now, there's things we can do with our tone of voice, and when that's even with like 8 months old, when they're touching something, we say no, that kind of thing. They start to learn. They're starting to understand that. But then when they have a will, when they can look at you, smile, and then do the thing that you told them not to do, I think it is important that punishment is swift, and that we also understand their age appropriateness. The 2-year-old who has a very hard time forming a sentence, we don't need to make them repeat what they did. We tell them what they did, and then we spank them. And then there's another thing that's got mixed in, and I think it's become fashionable of late, and really it's because of, people want to give their children grace. I'm all for grace, but you have to understand that the child has to be an appropriate age to understand grace. A 3-year-old does not understand grace. They understood that they just got away with transgression. So you're really working. You think that you're being merciful, right? But what you're doing is you're setting yourself 2 steps back, because now you've been inconsistent in that 3-year-old's mind. You can give a 9-year-old grace. The 9-year-old understands that they deserved it, that they didn't get it, that we're going to give forgiveness, and we move on. That's a discipline tool. The 3-year-old doesn't get that.
And it's kind of like the wisdom of parenting, because with Owen, being almost 3, the times I've given him grace have been the times he knew it. He knew he did wrong, and he hated it. And that doesn't happen all the time. But, like, there are those moments, like, where, like, your child knows that, oh, what I just did was wrong, and I don't like that I did wrong. It's not just about getting spanked that they don't like it. They really do feel bad about what they did.
The spanking is really, like, it's almost the thing that it's not the it is the thing, because they have to have it, but any parent knows it's not really the real
truthfully
problem. It's the breaking of fellowship.
Well, what the spanking is doing is you're trying to teach your children to hate sin. You're trying to show your kid that sin hurts us, that sin brings death.
Yeah.
And in the times where I haven't done that with Owen, in a moment, he's felt that death before I spanked him, because he's learned the lesson. And so I've been like, hey, this is grace. This is what God's grace looks like, right? And the idea being that, I'll give this other encouragement for parents disciplining your kid, because it does get really frustrating, right? Especially when those younger ages, when they keep doing it over and and over again. You feel like you're repeating yourself over and over. It's like, why can't they just get it? The encouraging thing I have for them that I've thought about is, because how often is it that we learn the lesson the first time?
Almost never.
And so what that is doing in God's sovereign wisdom and grace is He is ingraining in that child righteousness by having them fail over and over and over again, and having you correct them over and over and over again. So it's not this need to get frustrated with your child. It is God trying to work that into them, because He wants that worked in deep.
Yeah.
So that later in life, right?
You sin, you get punished.
Yeah. He like, if it's lying, say, if the kid's always lying, and you're like, man, I just keep talking about lying. He understands lying is wrong. I just don't know why he keeps lying. there is an element. You just keep discipline, keep being faithful.
Mm-hmm.
But there's praying to the Lord that He would convict their heart and show them where He's wrong. But also, I think we have to have the hope in our minds as parents is God is going to make my kid a truth teller.
Mm-hmm.
That's what He's doing right now. He's
Mm-hmm.
making him a truth teller later in life. He's showing it in him deep inside that he needs to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And He's helping him learn it in a big way.
Yeah.
Like, that's the hope that needs to be operating behind us on these things.
Yeah, when I was a kid, my dad would have me out, and I would have to do chores. And the first time he would turn around or get sidetracked, I would go back inside, try to get away. And he would, it would take him a while. He was busy. He'd come back and get me, and I would try to do that. I always try to sneak away, and I'm sure he was frustrated. I'm sure it was one of those deals where it's like, man, like, this kid, why does he keep going in? But I'll tell you, to this day, it's interesting. I have such a hard time leaving anything when I think somebody is counting on me. Like I'll stay. It's a thing that even in my 40s, it just got so ingrained because he was so consistent about, no, you're coming back out here. This is what we do.
Yeah.
And that's the blessing of discipline. So that would be the encouragement, is be intentional and stay the course on discipline.
Yeah.
And I think discipleship is very similar.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Well,
the same kind of thing, just in a more positive light.
I think that the other aspect that maybe like a lot of parents don't know how to do is family worship. Like, they know they should do family worship, and there's not one way to do family worship, but like, what are the practical ways? Because I think even our family worships in our houses look a little bit different right now, because something's going to look different with age of kids too.
Yeah.
But like, what somebody that doesn't know anything, they don't know how to do family worship at all. They're starting from ground zero. Their families never did it, right? Which I think is most people.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell them? What does family worship need to look like in their home?
I think the bare bones thing is that we need to set aside time to pray together. We need to speak about the Bible in an age appropriate way. So like for little kids, that's telling them the stories. The other day my girls are getting older. They asked me to tell them the story of David and Goliath, and they were old enough to where I could read it out of the scripture with commentary for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they loved it. They sat there and they wanted me to keep going. So as they grow older, that gets a little better. And I think look, it's hard. It's hard for guys. It's especially hard for guys like me that can't sing. But I think having good, solid Christian songs, hymns, is a good way to have family worship, because look, music stirs the emotions, and songs catechize children. Good hymns catechize children in a way that other things just can't. They're easy to remember, and they teach doctrinal truths. I've gone to that well my whole life from learning all those hymns as a child. And I know deep doctrinal truths that were stamped in when I didn't even understand them. And now I look at them and go, man, what a beautiful truth that song tells.
Well, it doesn't even look like having to, like, listen, I think it's
you don't have to sit down and have church. Like,
yeah.
These things can be like, sometimes it's just an intent. I pray with my girls every single night.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, there's some of those things. There's some of those things that are going to be rhythms. Like, I think, like, one of the things we do with Owen, every night we read a Bible story, and we read a couple other books that he wants to read, but always the Bible first, and then we always pray.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll do his catechism questions most nights, but that's really it. We read the Bible and we pray at night. That's family worship. But like you're saying, like, I think some people think family worship and they think church service. I need to have a church service in my home. What we're talking about is the pattern of your family's life should be worship.
Mm-hmm.
So like just an example. And then people are like, oh, it's that simple. That's what I hope you're thinking about this. Like some Saturday mornings, I'll wake up and I'll say, hey, Owen, do you want to listen to some music? And I'll let him pick the worship songs he likes. Like he likes Holy, Holy, Holy right now. He likes Come Thou Fount right now.
Those are good ones.
Yeah, he loves them. And he still asks for Hark the Herald Angels Sing because he loves those Christmas songs. Sometimes I'll play them for him. But
that's a great one.
We'll just play them. We'll play them over a speaker in our house and let him sing them. We'll play games while we're doing it, and he's singing them. That's family worship. It's trying to find ways to bring the Word of God into your life. And it's bringing the Word to bear. That's the discipleship piece, bringing the Word to bear in our life as family. Like telling Owen that we thank God for food because God provides us that food. Right? Or it was his birthday. I showed him a sunset. I said, God made that for you. Isn't God glorious? And showing him how to live this life where this is God's world. That's what family worship looks like. And I think there does need intentional time where families coming together for prayer and reading a Bible story. And the simple way to do it, I would think, would say, it could look as simple as this. We're going to read a Bible story. Well, it's one thing that stood out to everybody. And then we're going to pray about those.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Or even what was your favorite part?
Yeah. What was your favorite part? And you as a father or the mother in that moment might need to teach your children, okay, that favorite part, why does that matter?
Yeah.
Right? And then you teach them theology there. But it doesn't have to look like an hour thing. It can look like a 10-minute Bible reading and a 5-minute prayer.
Yeah, the key is that you need to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key. Like, don't let intimidation of thinking you need this perfect thing to get in the way of starting to do something and make it a routine and make it a rhythm.
And age appropriate, right? Good, like the Bible Storybook Bible that just came out by Kevin DeYoung. I bought it. I found it to be really good. I haven't read the whole thing, but I mean, he's Reformed, Presbyterian. Like, it's pretty solid theologically.
Yeah.
If your kids are younger, get that for them. If they're all older, say you have teenage kids, read the Scripture.
Yeah.
Read the Word of God
Yeah.
so that they can learn how to read the Word of God. Right, that's something that's a skill they have to grow in.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
that's the idea of family worship is you're coming together and you're a Christian home. Live like it. Talk about God, worship God, pray to God as a family.
Yeah, I mean, I think spending 5 minutes a day would probably, it's just going to put you so much further down the road than you probably are right now.
I mean, it's just amazing, dude. Like kids can get it. Like kids can get, like Owen, he knows 7 or 8 catechism questions. He. I can ask him, are there more gods than one? He says there's only one God, and how many persons does this one God exist? In 3 persons. Who are they? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And he knows Genesis 1:1. Like and he just turned 3, right? I'm not bragging on him. I'm just saying that if you're consistent with these things, they can learn it.
Well, yeah. I mean, they learn things that they hear all the time.
Yeah.
That's just the key. That's what it's about. Like all of this is about training, right?
With little kids, the idea is you should be sick of whatever questions you're doing.
Yeah,
as an adult.
Yeah,
that's probably how. Yeah. That's probably how you know you're doing a good job.
Yeah, and less is more. Make sure it's drilling down deep.
Yeah,
I think that would be my biggest takeaway. Is like, don't get too covered up.
So when we talk about sharpening arrows, we talk about the importance of building a family on a Christian structure, which is prioritizing the home. That God's normal order of life is women are raising their children, building the home, building their house. Men are providing and setting the direction for the home, and the wives are carrying that out. And the children growing up in the fear and admonition of the Lord, disciplining our kids. That's teaching them sins and disciplining them with a rod to show them sin hurts us, sin brings death. And then family worship, where it's really simple, talking about the Bible, praying to the Lord, teaching our kids we are a Christian family. And so that's all the things that, like, we talk about the Christian household. Yeah. There's this whole other piece of it, because you can do all that stuff right.
Yep. And then ruin it all.
With education. Because education is different than discipleship. Because, like, it's good your kids know all the Bible stories, but they also need to learn math, science, literature. They need to learn
critical thinking.
They need to learn critical thinking, logic. They need to learn all these things that let's put in the camp of education.
Yep.
And Wilson says in this book, because he's a whole chapter on education, that basically the idea is there is no Christian community without Christian education.
Yep.
Because we can build something. That's why I told our church. We can build something that's really great for us for the next 40 or 50 years. And we'll all have a great time, and we'll all really love it. But if we don't have something to pass on, and have people to pass it on to, what have we really done?
We've been a flash in the pan.
A flash in the pan. Yeah. We're not making generational impact, not handing on the faith that was once handed down to us. The idea is that we need to be intentional. So, like, the idea, I guess the overarching idea is Christians need to be intentional about educating their kids Christianly. And that can look a lot different in different avenues, right? Homeschool, private Christian school, whatever. But one of the big things, and I think it's getting kind of exposed right now, is public education's a problem.
It's a big problem.
So you're a public educator.
Yeah.
It's a big problem.
It's a big problem.
Because I know last time we did a Christian education podcast, right? And we talked about how public education is doable, but you're going to have to work just as much as you would in a homeschool environment. Like, you're still going to have to put in all that work. So you're going to have to deconstruct whatever the world is ingraining in your kids and discipling your kids in. Because basically what's happening is we've bought in this myth of secularism that these objective truths like math and science and literature don't have anything to do with God and don't have anything to do with his world.
Right.
And so we're trying to teach these things atheistically. And lo and behold, we have a bunch of Marxist, communist, statists out in our world today trying to turn America into a socialist hellhole. So
yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Just riff whatever you want to say, because, like, where do we need to start as a Christian educator? Where do we need to start thinking about this? How do we need to think about this as Christians?
Well, I think the first thing that we have to do is we have to take a long, sober look in the mirror and be as serious about the education of our children as we are about the discipleship and discipline of our children.
Okay.
And I think that what has happened is that we have been lulled to sleep. So America had a largely Christian founding. We've talked about that in a lot of detail. America had a lot of covenant blessings from their start and their commitments, right? We were committed under natural law, which is basically, a way of understanding the way that God has made the world, right?
I was listening to something that I can't remember what it was, but it's the idea that like Romans 1 talks about when God hands a culture over, what that culture looks like. It looks strikingly like America today.
Yeah.
And the only reason we're not Sodom and Gomorrah, where every man down to the child was coming out to rape those two angels, is because of the Christian heritage we've had restraining the evil that's there.
Yeah, and I think for a while, and it's funny, public education is a pretty even latecomer even in America, right? Like it really only took off kind of in the early 1900s. I know it kind of had fledgling beginnings before that, but it really took off then. And what happened is, for a long time, the apparent problem was masked under Christian culture, right? Like the culture was largely about Christian morals and ideas. And so public education kind of came in, and because of the cultural waters, it wasn't like as demonic as possible, right? Like it was very subversive. But
when they started, they were still teaching creationism.
But here's the problem, and here's the problem from the beginning, is that the government thought that it was its responsibility to make sure that they could do the parents' job. And therein lies the problem, right? So the government, even when it wasn't as bad as could be to start with, it got into a realm where it has no business being, and because of that, they are at war with God's design. And so by nature, if you are doing, think of it this way: if we start a Christian school, right, at our church, what we want to do is we want to train our kids to think the way our church thinks.
Yes.
So if the government starts schools, they want to train children to think the way the government thinks. And the way the government thinks is they're Leviathan. They have to get bigger. They have to take more, because the only way the government survives is by taking taxpayer dollars, right? So the way you do it is the government system basically says, here's what you have to do. And this is the stuff that's not on your nose: critical race theory, transgenderism, that kind of stuff. This is the more subversive. What the government does is it says, we need to train people to be compliant workers who will pay taxes. Okay? This is the goal. Look, that's the high goal of the American public education system, is to train compliant workers who will pay taxes. And along with that, what has happened is, because the government was control of education, we thought the government could be in control of all kinds of family things. Thus, we get welfare, we get, subsidized health care, all this kind of stuff. And so what eventually was the inevitable outcome is that public schools only really accomplish one thing, and that is training people to be dependent on the government. Just as we would teach children blatantly that they need to be plugged into the church and be part of the church, and really in some ways be dependent on what's going on at the church. Mm-hmm. The government says you have to be dependent on us. And why wouldn't they be? They're the only entity that's ever taught them anything about academics.
Well, and that's the thing, is like the government, when it's not submitted to God, like Romans 13 designs, that, because when the government's submitted to God as Romans 13 designs, then you can start talking about, is Christian education justice? Is it just to even have that and to use taxpayer dollars for that? That's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
We're having a conversation.
Yeah, that's not what they're doing.
No.
So that's a hypothetical that doesn't apply.
Yeah, like what we're talking about is the government obviously does not submit to God. So what do we think they're actually teaching our kids?
They're teaching whatever is going to make the government more powerful. And that's why what we've seen basically is that the government has grown more powerful by silencing voices that go against it, by uplifting certain groups to gain power. And that's where we have the bonanza in the public school that we see today. And what's happened is we've had a total collapse of accountability at every level. So I think of it this way: for a school system to work, there has to be accountability between the steering, whoever's governing the school, right? So a board of directors in public school, it's a school board, right? There has to be accountability between the school board, between the administrators who are managing teachers, between the teachers and the students, and then between the students and the parents. All levels of that have to have accountability. Public education has none anywhere. There is no accountability. The only thing that drives them is scoring test scores, because that's how you keep your name out of the paper and keep the numbers in your school, because every child's worth a certain amount of money from the tax slush fund. And that's what the whole thing becomes about. And I hate to say that. Look, I've been in it, and I'll tell you, like, I teach Christian worldview in my classes. I do. It's how can you be a Christian in the public education system? By being a Christian. Mm-hmm. And if that's not the way it's going to fall out, then that has to be a so be it. Like, I can work there and be a faithful person, but what I can't do is promote the folly that's going on. And it is. Like, and right now, so now that the fumes of Christian culture have left the building, public education in really almost everywhere is just a complete circus.
Well, this isn't even like just even a Christian argument. This is conservative red pill argument too, because like the conservatives that have no Christian values whatsoever, they're ticked about the education too, because all the homosexual, transgender. I mean, the Don't Say Gay bill, which doesn't even say Don't Say Gay, by the way.
Right.
The Florida bill that DeSantis signed, saying that hey, these parents shouldn't be. I mean, I think Al Stuckey had a great line, like the only people that want to talk about sex with kids that are not their own are either perverts or pedophiles.
Yeah.
Which is 100% true.
Yeah.
But that's the idea. Is it like? It's the masks that come off in the culture that public school, and I think so. Let me ask you this then, because like one of the arguments that always comes up is, well, that's happening like there, Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago, whatever. That's not happening here in my little small hometown.
Yeah, look, I'll tell you let's take all the craziness out, but it's here. Okay, I mean, transgenderism is here, teaching racial equity, scaffolding, trying to level out the playing field by eliminating all differences and playing to the lowest common denominator. That defines all the schools here, including my own. What defines what's going on is that we have to get an acceptable amount of test scores, and if you don't have that, we have to browbeat it until we can try to get it. Every kid walking around is a test score. I'm just telling you, that's the way it is. And where we have to go, here's the illusion that has to go away. And we know this in public education. The key to students excelling academically is the extent of involvement of their parents. Mm-hmm. So let's put it this way. If you are involved in your child's life academically, then no matter how bad the public school is, they're still going to get a good education because who's doing it, right? But if you're out of it, they have no chance there. In the public school, the myth that has to be destroyed is they don't do a good job teaching the supposedly neutral stuff.
And that's the problem too, right? Because they're not neutral. We think they're neutral. Like take math, for instance. If they were neutral, it's a totally tunable option because you're building the Christian worldview piece.
Look, let's put it this way.
And
that math is taught to be equitable, basically. Like even math, like the objective truth, right? The Pythagorean theory is the Pythagorean theory. Modern teaching theory has taken that away and said, look, we need to give a lot of partial credit for the ways that different people can think about these types of math problems. There's no neutrality in math whatsoever. It's all taught from an equity perspective, which is we got to level the playing field where all achievement winds up being in this middle zone. And that's where we're at. Like, I can't defend them. I really can't. Like it's a government bureaucracy is what it is. And it pains me to say it. I've given a huge part of my life to it, but I see it every day. And look, public educators who are Christians, I know there's lots of you out there. We can make a difference there, but that's not where the winning battlefield is going to be. And we have to understand that. We have to understand that there's a difference between going behind enemy lines as an adult and trying to make a difference in some people's life and sending your children in there to be educated. That is an entirely different scenario.
Well, that's the thing, because like a lot of parents will say, I want my kid to be a light. Like I hear that argument all the time.
They're going to get extinguished. They're not ready.
Yeah,
they're just not ready. I'm telling you, I wasn't ready. If I was in the public education system right now, and I was if I wasn't being just constantly discipled by my children, I would be going astray, and I would not learn as much math as I should. So let's just put it there. A mom looking for curriculum and spending 3 hours a week on math with their child is going to do a better job than the public education system.
For 40 hours a week.
I'm just telling you, it's a fact.
Yeah.
And the numbers bear it out. Vodi Bakum did one, and I'll get off the horse here for a second, but Vodi Bakum relayed a statistic, and he said that this is a national average. A 19-year-old single mom high school dropout who homeschools her child. Single mom, high school dropout, 19-year-old who homeschools their child. That child has the same national average standardized test score as a normal public school child.
Yep.
So all the disadvantage in the world for that mother, even just her limited ability to educate that child results in the same education that you're getting in the public school.
Yeah.
So the bar is low for homeschooling, and that doesn't mean that we need to make it low.
But also too, like I just think that I don't know. This has not been proven because I'm not an educator. One of my thoughts, because when I hear people, I don't know if I can do that. Is like honestly, your job is just to teach your kid to learn how to think and learn how to learn.
Yep.
If they can learn how to think and learn how to learn, they can do whatever.
That's right.
They can make it. They can learn anything. I don't remember anything about geometry or math, but I could learn it again because I know how to learn. I know how to think. Like that's the idea.
Well, I can tell you, my wife was terrified because our 5-year-old was not even school age yet. Like she missed the cutoff when we were doing that thing, and my wife was really scared. Like maybe I should just teach her to kindergarten so they can teach her how to read, right? Because she was really afraid that Charlotte wasn't going to be able to read. And here's what's so funny is like here's the environment is. Kelsey rolls out stuff for my 9-year-old Abby, and Abby is just she's a barmer. She's soaking up information. But Charlotte got so upset that Abby was able to read that Charlotte just learned how to read. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Kelsey wasn't even putting curriculum out for Charlotte to read. Kids want to learn, especially when they're in an environment where it's important. They want to do things that please you. This is the discipleship piece.
Well, I think
right?
what we're talking about too as Christians, as we think about this from a Christian perspective, the difficulty of sending our children into public schools as they are today is, again, not a sin. That's not like,
no, and that's I think in our other episode I wanted to take that off the table.
Yeah,
like I'm not saying that.
Yeah, but what we're saying is if they're actively working against all the worldview you're trying to build, so now you have two competing worldviews. It's who's going to prevail.
Yeah, your 5 hours of education a week with them is better than what's going on at the public school. And so the question is like, are you? Because again, this goes back right. This normal idea is we want moms to be home with their children, right? If that's not happening, then we're not even having the conversation homeschool-wise. So we would have to move into the Christian school thing. And I know that's probably where we're going to cap this thing off. But I'll tell you, if we're going to win the culture, we've got to educate our children Christianly.
Yes.
We have to. We have to teach them about what God says about biology, what God says about chemistry, what God says about literature. You know, the greatest minds that changed the world, 200 or 300 years ago, learned how to read by reading the Bible. And
well, that's why
that's the
I
thing.
think that's why education even started.
It is.
Churches were the ones educating because they wanted people to be able to read the Bible.
That's exactly right. And we had, if you read stuff from thinkers back then, they're big brain people. Because what better text to learn how to critically think and analyze the world truthfully than reading Scripture? And I mean, it really does get that simple. Like Abby gets up every morning, and the first thing she does when she gets out of bed is she writes a verse of the day down. And she's learning how to read the Bible by doing that.
Well, the whole idea we're talking about, like why we're spending so much time talking about education, because ultimately here's where it goes, is if those kids are not educated from a Christian worldview, and in fact that Christian worldview is destroyed and deconstructed by this public education system, because here's the really dirty truth about it. The fact of the matter is the atheists and the pagans are not repopulating. They're not having kids. There's a billboard in Oregon right now that says stop having kids because they're afraid the climate's going to go away, even though God promised that he's never going to flood the earth again. So my ice caps are going to be totally fine. But the idea is they don't have kids, and so they use us as breeders to indoctrinate our children to further their own worldview about climate change and whatever else they want to talk about, critical race theory, all that stuff, so that we become our children that we give birth to, that we labor for, that we pay for, that we work for, get stolen from us by the pagan world. And that's the opposite of what should be happening.
Yeah, and we have the power by simple Christian faithfulness to the Bible to stop this.
Yeah, if we can perpetuate a Christian culture by simply the fact of being fruitful and multiplying. I used to joke with my wife, this is not a hard and fast rule, I used to joke with my wife that we're two people, if we have two kids, that's only times one. That's not really multiplying, so we at least have to have three because that's times 1.5. Like the be fruitful and multiplying deal, and then raise them as Christians. Eventually, we're just going to outnumber the rest of the world that is not Christian, period.
Yeah, I mean, if we average 3 kids per Christian household, we're at basically double the national birth rate.
Yes.
So I mean, the growth is going to happen exponentially. And then the key is we can't lose them.
And that's where the Christian education piece comes in. Because what we can have is in 2 generations, 3 generations, the only people left are coming from a Christian heritage and Christian culture. Because the other people didn't have kids to have that.
Right. Yeah, and that's
how you change the world, right? That's why kids are that's why God calls them the arrows. That's why they are weapons, because as we are fruitful and multiply. Listen, God does like bless his people with children, and God does. And I'm talking about the Christian church. Obviously, there's people that would love to have kids, and through bitter providence, they can't have them. And it doesn't mean God has not blessed them. It just means that God, in His wisdom, what I always tell women that are in that situation is, every time you see somebody that is infertile in the Bible, God is near to them and kind to them, for a greater purpose. But the idea being, if we are intentional about educating our kids, then that's how we're going to change the culture one day, because eventually the Christians will outnumber the pagans, and that's exactly what they're happening right now.
Yeah,
I mean, the Christians are outnumbered by the pagans today.
Right. Yeah, and we have to stop the floodgates. Like we can't be losing 80% of them, and the reason we're losing 80% of them is because we're sending them for a third of their life up to that point to be educated by people who hate Jesus. There's Christians in the education system, but the system's against Christians. Well, we see it. It's right there in front of you. You have to teach in public education that the world came from a random explosion. That is the biology curriculum. That is, make no mistake. Unless you have a rogue teacher in the public education system, your children are going to be taught right away that they're not made in God's image, that they're a cosmic accident, and that this whole thing is happening by chance. And so then the logical conclusion is, what does your life matter? Get as much as you can right now and be happy. And that is the relentless discipleship and indoctrination of the world, and that's what's going on.
Well, that's the human secularism that has infiltrated our whole culture.
Right. And it all started with taking away creation, because if God didn't make it, then He has no say in it. And so we have to stop. And I wish I could pound the table. It's one of those things I wish, and this is a thing that I want to pass to my children. I was so slow on the uptake with it. And it is because, like I didn't realize, I had a lot of good teachers growing up in a small, Northwest Arkansas school that was very conservative. But at the same time, like, were they teaching me to logically defend God's truth? No. So I wasted a huge amount of time that I could have been being developed in a biblical worldview, instead of wasting time on deconstructing lies that there's rocks that are 80 billion years old on the earth that we need to look at. I mean, that's just nonsense. It's spending a bunch of time learning lies to spin them back on a multiple choice test, when what I should have been doing is learning what does God say in this? He has a say in science. He has a say in math. And we need to learn it from that perspective.
Well, and that's why how those things, all of life is for Christ and for
right.
His glory. And that's where, like, math, it was given to us by God so that we can understand how He ordered the world logically, and that we could solve problems, figure out things, right? Have enough sandwiches for all of our children to raise them. I mean, like, I have 4 kids. That means I need 4 sandwiches. I mean, that's math.
Yeah.
And that's what God is talking about. Like, God showed us these things for His glory. And if we're educating our children, trying to do it from an atheistic or neutral point of view, then they're also missing out on this glorious truth of who God is, and we are robbing God from the glory He deserves.
Yeah, and I'll throw a little barb here too. Is like, as we look vision, and for our church people to be praying, as we're exploring the ability to start a school that that we have a big hand in. And I think one of the things is that obviously that's going to benefit a lot of our parents, but the other thing that we got to think about is that the public system is doing such a poor job that we're going to get a lot of outsiders in that school too, and we're going to be turning the arrows of the pagans back on them in a lot of ways.
The idea being, like, whether or not that even happens, right? Because, like, the Lord has to bring that up. Like, we're praying for it, we love it, but also the Lord decides all that stuff. What we're really talking about, whether it's a Christian school or whether it's a bunch of common community parents that are intentionally homeschooling their kids,
which is a great thing.
Whatever, like even like a homeschool co-op idea.
Yeah.
Whatever we're doing, that we as Christians need to be thinking, okay, how are we raising our kids in the Lord? How are we discipling them in the Lord? How are we helping them see all of life for the glory of Christ? And then we put them out in the world to have a world submitted to Christ. I mean, that's how you get businesses. That's how you get banks. That's how you get all these things submitted to God's word.
That's who starts to do commerce, right? That generation. And that's what, Wilson wrote the book that kind of started this whole thing that we're talking about. And it's interesting, in Moscow, Idaho, where he is, they started their school in the early 80s. At this point, in Moscow, Idaho, over 80% of the K through 12 children in that city are either homeschooled or in private school right now. And that has, in mild terms, that has gotten the secularist attention there, right? that is why people are lighting their hair on fire,
God,
because they see the writing on the
wall.
The
last few years, like if we're talking about what we're saying isn't even really that controversial, because like the last few years, if we're talking about God shaking the world and shaking all the things that we've held on to so that what cannot be shaken might remain, that's Christ's kingdom. One of the things that has been shaken is education system. COVID has exposed it. Yeah. And now the critical race theory stuff has exposed it. And now the homosexual transgender stuff has exposed it.
Yeah.
Where the number of homeschool children in America in the last 2 years has blown up and exploded.
Look, and I'll throw this one out there. This is inside fastball, but I know about it because I'm a public educator. Arkansas has mandated state curriculum. It's called social environmental learning, which is basically critical race theory under another name. And look, so it's whether your school does it or not, it's state mandated curriculum, and so teachers have legal cover to push it. So it's there, it's on the books, and if your school's not peddling it, then they're not following the rules. I mean, that's where we're at. If they're selling, we got to think strongly.
At the end of the day, what we're really saying is, I think in the past we have been passive about education.
Yes,
that we have been passive in it, just saying, "Oh, it's fine. Just send them on. It's fine. That's what you do. Sports, blah blah." What we're saying is, we have to now start taking an active role in educating our children and educating them in the Lord and in Christ, and whatever avenue God leads our family to do that, right? Because we're not going to be legalists saying, well, you got to, like, 'cause there's like those crazy fundamentalists that'll be like, homeschool's the only way.
Right.
That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is Christian education is the only way.
Yes.
How you do that is going to be up to each individual family according to the conscience and what the word of the Lord says.
Yes.
To them, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, at the end of the day, what we're pushing is we cannot be passive anymore. And if we are not passive, God will bless it. And in the next generation and in the next generation, we'll see massive transformational cultural change.
Yep.
Just from being faithful to what God says. Because I think that's the thing. We can look at our life and say, how much difference in the world can I make? I'm one guy with one family. But when we start thinking about it this way, okay, I'm one guy, but I have 3 kids that'll eventually have 3. Well, I don't have 3 kids yet, but Lord willing, I'll have 3, maybe 4. Well, eventually I'll have more families. So right now I have 2 sons. I'm one family. Eventually I'll have 2 families come from me that have the same values and same morals as I do, same worldview as I do. And they'll have families that are hopefully 2 each. And then you get every Christian in your church doing that. Yeah, what you're doing might seem insignificant right now, because in like your little myopic view, in the short-term view, it is insignificant, quote unquote. But if everyone's doing that, what kind of army are we unleashing on the world eventually?
Yeah, and look, bringing it all back, I think we've done it every episode to the Great Commission. Like, what's going on? Like, what are we actually talking about doing, if not making disciples, right? Isn't that the whole weapon of this whole episode is, what are we supposed to be doing? We're making disciples. Where's the most pivotal, foundational, fundamental way to do that? In our own home with our own children.
Like Marx knew, listen, you want to get real weird about it. Karl Marx knew if you controlled the kids and their education, you controlled everything. And that's why Karl Marx wanted women out of the home. That's why he empowered women workers. It was not because he was a happy feminist. It's because he knew he wanted the kids. And the only way you could get the kids is if you convinced the parents, both of them, to leave the kids into the state's hands.
Yeah, and state education is just a Marxist tool, plain and simple.
Yeah.
And that's why the only thing it's good at doing is creating socialists.
Yeah.
That's where we are. It's been going on too long.
Like the last thing I would have to say would be, I failed to say it at our members meeting that we had, but it's the thing that, man, like if you want a vision of like what I hope will happen here, on the one hand, I hope our church becomes so inbred. I hope all of our kids start marrying each other, like not in our own individual families.
Right. Yeah. No weird cult stuff going on here.
not that kind of inbred. Just like where you have, man, it's hard to find Reformed Baptists out there.
Yeah.
And we have a big pool of kids. We have 120 kids right now and counting every single day that they're going to be able to hopefully find spouses to raise more children like this. But not only that, like just imagine if most of us have come to Calvinism, say later in life, to Reformed theology later in life.
Yep.
I'm going to throw this one out there. Not everyone has to be this way, but postmillennialism to later in life. Imagine and look at what God is doing in our life. Look how valuable it's been. Look how much it's changed us. Imagine what will happen if you have kids that do not have to learn this stuff from scratch, like meaning trying to figure it out in their 20s and 30s.
Right.
But they're growing up in that environment, growing up with that solid theology, growing up with that solid biblical teaching, and they are learning how to be Calvinist, Reformed, hopefully postmillennial Christians that have a biblical worldview. what kind of damage are they going to be doing out in the world whenever they get out of this place?
Yeah, I mean, because they've already got their third kid that they're discipling by the age of 30, and I was being a big dummy fighting against even the idea of having kids when I was 30 because I was a big dummy.
Yeah.
I mean, and look, I had a lot of things, but I didn't have this, and that's what excites me the most about what's going on at Reformation Baptist Church. That's what excites me the most is the generational footing that we're going to be putting our children on that is growing from generation to generation. Yep. And we're so early that we're doing those things that we're not going to see the benefits of, but we're trusting the Lord is good, and God is always faithful. He doesn't lie. He's not capable of lying, and He's going to fulfill this mission.
That's like why, like, in a lot of churches, when you have the ratio of kids adults that we do, it like makes people go insane, and they don't know what to do with that. And we're sitting here like, bring more of the kids.
It makes me so happy. It shows that our parents want to have generational blessings. I love that so much. It's one of my favorite things.
And that's how we're going to change the world. That's how we're going to change Northwest Arkansas. Is our kids are going to get out of here, and they're going to be biblical Christians that live according to a biblical worldview out in this world.
Absolutely. Well, I think that I'm probably done here, and I think we're vying for the record the longest episode ever here. So I hope that it was good and punchy, and I hope that you also tune in next time to continue this series on everyday discipleship.